This is great. I'm excited to be here and talking to you about synthetic datasets. So what exactly are these synthetic datasets, and why are these interesting? Well, when we're talking about large language models, and I would say now with the current releases of smaller language models like 5.3, which was just released by Microsoft a few days ago, large language models in general, I would say, well, you can interact with them, but you can also use it to get some interesting data. Now, data sets are the foundation for building machine learning models. And we're training these models based on data, and sometimes that data, well, it's scarce and it's kind of difficult to get. But for effects that sometimes we want to have more data that is kind of similar to give a little bit of variety to what we're dealing with, a technique known as synthetic datasets is what fits in perfectly. What it is basically we talk to the language model, we get some outputs, and these outputs are used to build a dataset. So today we're going to see how to do exactly that. I've put together some examples. We're going to use a combination of different things. We're going to use a combination of local models, models in the cloud with an API. And most importantly, I'll show you some of the things that might be interesting if you want to actually start building your own synthetic datasets based on interactions with the large language model. So let's get started here. And what I have right now, we're going to start with a Jupyter Notebook. A Jupyter Notebook is a way of interactively work with Python code. And in this case, we have Python code here, everything set up. And I am going to show you, let's just walk around what we have right here so that we can get started. We can have like the foundations of what we have and how we're going to interact with it. And then we'll move to the next part. So for the next part, we're going to build an actual HTTP API. We're going to test it out, and we're going to make this HTTP API get us some facts about the data that we want to get generated. So it's almost like an automation step, and we're gonna have like this layer of automation on top, and we're gonna make it look very, very nice. All right, so we have the Jupyter Notebook. We have everything set up here. And so we have a couple of options, and I'll walk you through the options very quickly. So the first one is connect to a large language model locally. There's plenty of options to do this nicely. There's many different programs out there. I prefer Llama-File, which is pretty neat. If you search for Llama-File, you'll see that it has many different options. This is how you would use that. Now, I'm throwing you straight into the application, but I didn't tell you exactly how we're going to make it work. Well, right here, what we have is the OpenAI library, the OpenAI SDK in Python. We're going to be working with Python today. And so the neat thing about a lot of these models and wrappers around models is that we can reuse the OpenAI library because these models are exposing its capabilities using an API that matches the API from OpenAI. So that's pretty cool. And you can see here how the base URL points to my local system right there on port 8080 and /v1, which is actually pretty common for large language models and pretty common for the OpenAI API. You can see here that the API key is anything really, it's just whatever string. It doesn't matter. I don't need a key because I have a local model running. So if I call this, if I run this cell, things will be already set up for me to interact with this local model. Now, the other way is, you can actually use OpenAI, but in this case, I have an HTTP API, a model deployed on Azure. So why is this interesting? Well, because I'm connecting to an API, I do need an API key for this one to work. And you can notice that I have the URL, it's already not localhost, right? I have deployed this. When you deploy it, you have to deploy with a unique name. In this case, for me, it was demo-alfredo. It has to be unique because otherwise you would clash. So if right now you go into Azure and you want to create one that is called demo-alfredo, it's going to fail. It needs to be unique. So in this case, I made it unique. And that's kind of like my endpoint. And it's protected. Nobody can access it unless they have this special key, which I have it right here called Azure_OpenAI key. Now, that's not the actual key. That's an environment variable. So I have a special file in my system, and I've used this very neat library called .env, which is right here at the very top. And .env is a library that looks around your file system, and it loads that file and exports or makes available those special variables that are inside along with their values. So now in here, you don't need to see the actual key. So it's kind of like basically a way to protect my keys from being exposed. Great, so I have that there. And this allows me to connect to Azure OpenAI. So I'm gonna run this. Now I know I ran the other one before. I'm gonna run this executed so that things are properly set up. That didn't take too long. Now, nothing has happened yet. We've just created a little bit of Python code, a little bit of glue, and said, hey, by the way, you're going to go to this place, you're going to use this key to authenticate, and we're going to use that in order to start building our data set. So I'm going to scroll down here, and this is where kind of like the crux of the problem starts happening. Now, this looks like a giant blob of text, but let me break it down so that it looks a little bit more interesting. So I'm telling the language model that I have CSV data. CSV is a comma-separated value format, and the CSV data is actually pretty common in machine learning, and when we're building machine learning models and AI models, these are kind of like it's a foundational way of having and dealing with data. So in this case, I actually have this data set about wines from all different parts of the world. And these are separated by the columns of name, region, variety, rating, and notes. As you know, different wines are rated on a scale from, they say a scale to 100, but it's actually more of like from the upper 90s. Kind of all the way to the 100. So there's a little bit on the 80s, but an 80s score is not very good for wine. But suffice to say that this is very good to get us started. But what's the problem? Well, we don't have enough data. So I'm actually telling the large language model, hey, I have a few rows here. I'm going to give you an example. And with this example, I want you to generate more. So the actual example is very rich. It has tons of text, but it basically follows this convention of name, region, variety, ratings, and notes. So we can attempt to read one. Let's see, 3 Rings Reserve, Shiraz 2004, Barossa Valley, South Australia. Perfect, so we start with Australia, and I think this one's like 3, and you see it all compacted because it's a lot of text. So VS Code here is just like making it very concise. Now, the interesting part is below. I would like you to generate synthetic data based on this input. Produce me 10 more examples of data formatted for CSV to augment data sets. So I'm giving the language model the instructions necessary so that they can generate a little bit more. Now, beyond that, beyond my prompt, like I'm the user, I'm like typing this all out, I have these ways of kind of like fine-tuning, kind of like, not exactly fine-tuning for the model, but kind of like fine-tuning my prompt, like the special instructions, like the behind-the-scenes instructions on how we're going to interact with the large language model. And these are right here in the messages. So I am going to have the role, and the system is one of these important aspects. And in this case, you're a specialist in generating synthetic data based on inputs. You provide output formatted for CSVs to augment data sets. So it's pretty interesting, pretty straightforward, nothing really out of the ordinary. It's very straightforward to understand. So, but when I execute that, what's the output? Well, I get, sure, I can help you generate synthetic data based on the input provider. Here, 10 examples of synthetic data. And you can see here that it actually was able to generate a lot of examples. These are all made examples. Perhaps some of those actually exist. We don't care because it's synthetic, right? The premise is that we understand that this can be a little bit not really real. But what's the problem? If I am a developer and I want to treat this programmatically, then I can't have all of these, hey, sure, Alfredo, thank you so much for your prompt. Here you have a bunch of data. Hope you have a great day. It's like, no, I just need the data. So how can I improve these so I can only have the data that I want? I don't want to be copy-pasting 10 lines of CSV data and copy and pasting and copying and pasting. That doesn't really work. Developers, we are kind of lazy, and what we do is we build automation. We write some code so things are exactly the way we want it. Okay, so actually this comes with a warning from the large language model. It says, please know that the above data is entirely fictional. Yes, I know, I understand. I really, really do. This is why this is called a synthetic dataset. So what's the next step? How can we make it slightly better, right? Because again, I don't want those pleasantries. I don't want those things around. So I'm gonna keep scrolling here, and same thing. Same prompt as before, that the user prompt is the same, except we're tweaking the system prompt. And let's see what we're having. And I'm gonna close here the file explorer so we can have a better view. I would act as an API for generating synthetic data based on inputs. That's a major statement right there, because now the large language model, or the language model actually in general, will act as an API. What's an API? Well, it's kind of like an HTTP service that will respond specific responses in text, sometimes in specific formats like JSON, that will give you data. It won't tell you, hey, hi, thank you so much for your prompt. Here's the data that you want. And remember, this is synthetic. See, that's not going to happen, right, for an API. So great, I'm telling the large language model, by the way, this is what you need to do. Provide output formatted for CSVs, which is important because I'm actually wanting that CSV format. To augment data sets, do not provide any other feedback, input, questions, or any other kind of text that will not be valid CSV based on the input received. I'm being really specific with this large language model to try to kind of like guide it towards where I want it. Actually, the way I think sometimes about large language models in general is like they're like a toddler. So a toddler is starting to walk, and you say, let's go to the left, and you grab the hands, and then you turn around, it's like it starts going to the right. No, just to the left, keep going to the left. It's like, and then they forget, it's like going to the right. No, let's go back again. So I'm reinforcing the idea of exactly what is it that I want in the way that I want it. When you reply, there's no need to provide the headers, just the data. Perfect. So one of the aspects of CSV data is that at the very top, you will have some headers, which are part of this. But I don't care. I already have the headers. There's no need for the large language model to provide those things over and over again. And everything else is the same. And look at the output. I mean, I know it looks like a blob of text, but you should notice that now what we have is something that it's clean. It looks clean. There's no like, hey, sure, here's some data that you asked, and remember that this is fictional data, right? It's acting like an API. Excellent. So this is what we have. This is how we get there. So where do we go next? Well, let's just assume the following. And I usually like to use my boss as an example. My boss sometimes says, hey, Alfredo, like we need to solve this problem yesterday. People are asking for it, and we need to get this going. So in this case, let's just assume that my boss came in and said, your Jupyter notebook looks awesome, Alfredo, but we need to have this deployed somewhere. We need to have this, we need to make this an API. We need to automate this because there's lots of people asking for this generation of synthetic data. We cannot be just using your Jupyter notebook and copying things around and asking people to connect. Like, this is not feasible. We need an API, and we need it yesterday. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to grab these, we're going to build an API. Now, sometimes building an API from scratch, kind of tricky, but we're going to use Copilot. I'm going to use Copilot to kind of like help me answer some questions and get me to where I need. Now, there's certain difficulties and there's certain design decisions. I am going to go very fast and try to make something super simple that works, and then we'll see if we have enough time to make extra things and make them slightly better. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a Python file, empty file, and then I'm going to start from there. And then we'll be using Copilot to kind of like guide us through what we have on the Jupyter Notebook towards the API. So I'm going to go to the File Explorer here, and I am going to add a new file. I'm going to call it main.py. The name of the file doesn't really matter. It's just that it is a Python file, and that's good enough for what we want. So I'm going to do that. There's nothing here. Now, the next design decision, and I think that's kind of like where we're going to end things, the next design decision is using a framework that I personally like for Python, which is called FastAPI. And you will see later why FastAPI, like I really like it, but you will see exactly why, because it makes it easier to interact with the API once you have it up and running. So let's just use that. And I'm going to do a mix of different things with Copilot here. I'm going to start typing some things and see what the ghost text, what the suggestions on the completions are going to look like. So let's start by doing our imports. Or actually, let's see if Copilot can help us with the imports. Make necessary imports to create a FastAPI application. Sure. Perfect. That's exactly what I need. From FastAPI, import FastAPI. Now, FastAPI has a thing where we need to I swear that Copilot is the first and only thing I've ever used in any text editor that makes me laugh out loud. Because what I was going to say, it is exactly to create an instance of FastAPI. So I'm going to accept this suggestion, pressing tab, and in here, it's going to be, yes, exactly, Copilot, thank you so much. It's going to be app equals FastAPI. So what we've done there is we've created an instance. We instantiated FastAPI. We told us, okay, by the way, you're an application. You should be ready. I'm going to call you out and save that to that variable on line 5. Yes, we're going to define a route for the root URL. The root URL is like essentially what do you get when someone reaches the top level. So sure, like let's add one. So that's what the slash means. Read root, yes, hello world. Let's actually make it nicer here. We're gonna type text, and we're gonna say an API for generating data, of course. Yes. So tab there. And then now we get into the actual thing that we need to do. Yes, we are going to define a route for the generate data URL, but actually I'm just going to call it generate. And I'm going to say URL, perfect, app get. We're not going to use get. So sometimes with Copilot, you have to be kind of careful, because what you want is to make sure that things that are not quite good, they actually, you need to understand what's going to happen. A get request is not what we want. I want a post request. So I'm gonna say post, and sure, generate looks correct to me. So I'm gonna only accept a post request for this one. So generate data. Now, this is not quite it, right? Because it's just returning anything, it's just returning a string. But this is sort of like good enough. I'm gonna save it. How about we run it? Now, I've pre-installed the dependencies. The dependencies that are pre-installed is FastAPI, of course, and Unicorn, which is a thing that allows me to run this. So I'm going to run the web server. I know this is not exactly what we want, but let's see if it works. So I'm going to toggle my terminal, and I am going to say, I'm going to see if Unicorn is there. It is, and I'm going to run this. So that will be Unicorn. -- host is going to be 0.0.0, meaning running my local system and just bind to my machine only. And then this is going to be main, which is the Python module, and then colon app. And how about we do -- reload, which it will detect automatically if I'm making changes, so it will automatically reload. So I'm going to do that, and look at that, it's running on port 8000. So I'm going to switch to my browser really quickly here. And of course, there's nothing there right now, but I'm going to reload. And I know this is kind of hard to see, but it's like, hey, there's an API for generating data. Now, remember when I chose FastAPI, I said, hey, I'm going to choose these, I'm going to make this decision, but I'm going to tell you later why this is pretty cool? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. So I'm going to go to the URL. I'm going to say /docs, and look at that. Oh my God, it's very, very nice. It has, we didn't, this by the way, I didn't code. You didn't see me do CSS, JavaScript, HTML, nothing. This comes with the framework. Not only that, it will allow me to interact with the API. One of the most tricky things to do is to actually interact with an API that you have running. So let's actually take a look at that. So we have post on generate. So we're going to click here in the dropdown. I'm going to click on try it out. It doesn't accept any parameters. Sure, I'm going to execute this, and we get our response right there. Data generated successfully. Perfect. So that's like, to get started, that's already pretty good, but that's not kind of like what we want, right? Like we want the synthetic data set generation. So let's go back pretty quickly and start fixing away. So I am going to actually close this to give us some room, and let's poke around. So we need to actually import OpenAI from OpenAI, import OpenAI. And then in here, instead of generate, we're going to say client. If you remember from, this is not exactly the correct way. So we're going to have to check here our Jupyter notebook. We're going to have to return back to where we were. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the top. And for this one, we're going to just do the local one. So this is what we want. So we're going to connect locally, and you can see it's already not liking it, and that's why it's all red. So I'm going to paste that. It's almost like I found this on Stack Overflow and I'm pasting, but not quite. I built it, I swear. I actually took my time to build this. All right, so client OpenAI, that looks correct. I'm going to save these. But then when it returns, I don't need this return to return like this. So we need to actually interact, right? So let's go back. This is how we connect to the local large language model. And now we need the interaction portion of it. And the interaction portion is going to be this one right here. And I'm going to copy from here. We're not going to print things. And not that one, because that one is the generic one. We're going to use the good prompt that has all of the good stuff for the API. Perfect. So I'm going to use this one. That's going to be the system prompt. And how about we're going to copy this one? And, well, we are going to copy, how about we copy the whole thing? And I promise we're gonna try to make it really nice. I know this is going to be rough inside a function, but we're gonna try to make it work, because we're gonna try to make it go fast. We'll have a few more minutes left, and we want to get this running. So I'm gonna paste this here. I'm gonna select it and try to make the indentation. As you know, Python is kind of nitpicky on the indentation. That looks correct to me. And now let's assign this to a response variable. I'm going to do that. And then instead of data generated successfully, we're going to put the response right here. Great. So I'm going to save that. And I'm going to toggle the terminal so you can see how do you see that shutting down? That's the server restarting. So I don't need to stop the process and start again. So I'm going to go back here. I am going to go all the way to the top. I am going to reload these, generate data, no parameters. I'm going to try it out. I'm going to execute. And whoa, what are we getting? Look at that. So we're getting a ton of responses here that are coming from our FastAPI. Now, this looks okay. This looks good enough. How about I just return plain text? I don't want to return JSON. So do you see that? Do you see that bracket over there? That curly bracket and the text, that's a JSON response. So JSON is a formatting on the response. We have this data within the curly brackets, and text would be the key, and the value would be the thing separated, what comes after the colon, in this case, the string with all of the wines. But what if we don't want to have kind of like that setup? We just want to return the actual data set as text. So we're going to close this one here. And we're going to just return the response. So it's going to be kind of like a plain text response. Let's see if this will be fine doing it this way. So let's try this again. I'm going to try it out. I'm going to click execute. And the response now comes as plain text. So perfect. So we've made a ton of progress here. Things are looking very good. Now, what are some of the next steps in, when you're dealing with application? Now, I can actually tell my boss right now, hey, this is good to go. We can deploy, well, I wouldn't be so enthusiastic about deploying this to production, but I would say I have something ready, I have a proof of concept ready, we can start trying it out. That's the way that I would tell my boss, so kind of like guarding against anything that I've done that is not quite production ready. And now he basically wouldn't be able to tell me, it's like, well, Alfredo, this is not a very good code. Hey, I said proof of concept, and this actually works and does something. We can actually start spelunking and doing more investigation, and what are some of the things that we need to consider. So actually, when we talk to GitHub Copilot, there are certain things that we can ask. And there's a couple of things that we can do beyond just writing documentation or writing some unit tests. Actually, unit tests will be good. But here, in this case, we're dealing with a large language model. We're dealing with an API. We're paying for some tokens. We're paying for this service. How about we figure out a way to throttle this a little bit, right? So let's understand, I don't know how I would go around throttling and making sure that this doesn't get abused, that I don't get 10,000 requests per second. How can I just hit the brakes on this if someone starts going overloading the service? So I have this FastAPI in Python working very nicely, but I need to understand some considerations I should take for launching this into production. Specifically, let's focus on throttling and preventing. I cannot type for the life of me. Preventing abuse. So Copilot is very good at this, and it will actually start providing me some of the things that I can do: rate limiting, authentication and authorization, which is pretty good. You know that I'm already authenticating, error handling, logging. Well, logging is amazing, but not necessarily so for the things that we want to. It actually suggested a slow API, which is something pretty interesting. And what's happening there is that slow API seems to, I've never tried it before. So with anything that comes from a large language model or any language model, you cannot treat things as facts. What you need to understand here is that large language models, and language models in general, are probability machines. They say, if you have this word, probably this word will follow, and if you have this bag of words, probably this other bag of words make sense. It's not based on facts. It's not a database behind the scenes. It's trained on existing data. It will give you, most of the time, very good suggestions. You need to be wary. So in this case, it's telling me about slow API. I've never used it. First time I hear about it. The first thing I would do is I would check on it, try to see if there's anything that if it exists or not. If it exists, it sounds interesting. It says implement rate limiting to prevent abuse of your API. Exactly what we need here. And then I would say authentication and authorization, both are very good suggestions. So I think there you go. I think we're in a good spot. If I had to consider anything else, what I would do is perhaps add some tests, add some documentation, make sure that this is robust. And if there's any, tests are very important because it will allow to have me to have confidence that this synthetic dataset generation API is actually very good and very sound, and that I'm not making breaking changes in the future. So that's it. Hopefully you can get to try some of these techniques that I show you today, and hopefully you use Copilot as well to kind of help you, guide you through the difficult things that sometimes are kind of tricky. You have the idea, you know what you want, your boss is waiting, and this is a perfect way in order to make something like a proof of concept work.
Awesome. Alfredo, that was great. You packed a lot into that. that 30-minute session, so really appreciate it. Now, before we dive into some questions that we got, I have one that I'm going to be a little selfish and ask you myself. So I have some experience with Python, and I've done like some stuff with like functions and FastAPI, but curious if you could give me like a straightforward answer in terms of like when to use something like Django versus FastAPI versus Flask.
Yeah, well, like most things in life, we have many different choices, and making a decision is very difficult. I, for example, love coffee. You go to any supermarket, you go to the coffee aisle, and what you're going to be faced is with an exuberant amount of coffee choices. Do you want vanilla flavor? Do you want more of like the Kona blend, the light toasting, the darker toasting? So it's just very, very, very tricky. So depending on what stage are you on your knowledge journey for what the things you want to do, I would say, well, try certain things and see how you feel about them. The thing that FastAPI that I really like is that it exposes the self-documenting section, and you can try it out for an API that looks pretty awesome. That's good enough for me. And before I used to use Flask a lot. Flask is also pretty good. Django, I've actually coded in Django in production environments, and it has more things to it. Like you can interact with databases and make things certain things by default available to you pretty nicely. And that's also a very good option. But I would say my best suggestion, as with anything, try them out. See which one feels more comfortable, which one makes you feel more productive and more happier. Nobody wants to be like cranky and be like, oh my goodness, this framework just makes me very upset. Nobody wants that. And when we're upset, coding doesn't really work. So
awesome.
Try it out.
I appreciate the answer, and it's great that we had Dawn's session on Django. Now we have a little bit of FastAPI with you, Alfredo. So it's awesome to have a little bit of both there. Randall, do you have another question for?
Yeah, there was a question by Rich Lisakowski. He asked, where's the Jupyter notebook for this example? Please share the URL. So is that something we could probably share in the URL?
Yes, 100%. I'll make sure to share these resources out. All of this is public code. It's actually right now, it's under my GitHub account. It's public code that you can try and look around. It's something that I've used to teach. I'm also a teacher, but I teach a little bit a couple times a year. Love teaching. So yeah, all of these examples are public. You can make use of them. The Azure one, I even put documentation in it. So like if you want to try it out, it's not just a bag of code. It's actually usable things that tell you like, hey, click here, do these. These are the setups, and get you started.
Great. Alfredo, thank you so much for spending some time with us answering some questions.